What if Robb Stark married Margaery Tyrell? The war should have ended Robb Stark. It nearly did, twice. But what saved him wasn't a sword or the loyalty of the North. It was a girl in a garden, whispering promises that smelled sweeter than roses. The marriage of Robb Stark and Margaery Tyrell was hailed as the most shocking alliance since Aegon's conquest. Northern lords growled and grumbled, but the truth was undeniable. The Reach's armies were massive, the Tyrell coffers deep, and Margaery, she knew how to smile like a queen even before she became one. Catelyn Stark was silent when she first heard of the betrothal. Her son's eyes burned with pride when he announced it, as if he'd just conquered the South without blood. Margaery Tyrell will be my queen. With her, we will end the war. With her, the North will never kneel again. But Catelyn had lived long enough in the South to know a different truth. Flowers grew thorns, and the Reach was a garden that buried its secrets in sunlight. The wedding took place in Riverrun, under banners stitched with wolves and golden roses. The Blackfish stood watch, arms crossed. Lord Hoster was too far gone in his fever to care. The Tyrells arrived in splendor, Olenna Redwine in tow, her tongue as sharp as ever. "At least this one doesn't have a face like a foot," she said with a smirk when she met Robb, which earned a polite cough from Catelyn and an amused glance from Margaery. But behind the feasts and vows, something colder stirred. It started with small things. Lords from the North, who used to have Robb's ear, found themselves waiting outside chambers for hours. Margaery's handmaids flitted like shadows, whispering names Robb didn't remember allowing into court. Tyrell riders escorted Stark bannermen. "For their safety," Margaery said sweetly. Margaery, ever graceful, was adored by the people. She visited wounded men in makeshift hospitals, gifted honey and bread to the small folk, and held court in gardens where laughter flowed like wine. Yet Catelyn noticed none of her decisions ever lacked strategy. Every kindness placed her deeper into the heart of the North, and further into her sons. "She is clever," said Talisa, Robb's healer, before she was dismissed. "And clever women scare kings." But Robb was blind to it. He was young, yes, but more than that, he was weary. The war had cost him thousands of good men, half his childhood and all of his heart. He was tired of blood and loss. In Margaery he found comfort. In her softness he imagined peace. But peace with the Tyrells came with a price, and Robb had unknowingly paid it in loyalty. At Winterfell, where ravens flew thick and fast, the news of the marriage caused quiet rage. Lady Mage Mormont refused to send further men. Lord Glover sent a letter with 2 words, "You're lost." Still, none of it mattered when the Tyrell banners marched with the North. With Highgarden's troops, Robb took Harrenhal, then Crackclaw Point. King's Landing grew nervous, and whispers reached even the Iron Throne. The boy wolf had grown fangs, and a southern queen to match. But the closer he drew to victory, the more distant the North became. Arya was still missing. Bran and Rickon presumed dead. Sansa, trapped in King's Landing. Catelyn warned him, "You win a kingdom but lose your people." Robb only held his mother's hand and said softly, "I will bring her back. I will bring them all back." Yet in the nights when ravens screamed over camps, Margaery slept like a stone. She never dreamed of Winterfell. And unknown to Robb in the Reach, Lord Mace Tyrell was already writing letters, not to the Starks, but to the Lannisters, carefully worded, sealed in golden wax. Because for all the songs sung of wolves and roses, no bard ever tells the part where the garden strangles the forest. The North had never known roses before, and now it bloomed with them, embroidered on banners, pressed in wax seals, even planted in the gardens outside Moat Cailin. The Reach's culture began to trickle north like wine poured over old stones, and the North drank it in slow gulps, unsure whether it was sweetness or poison. Margaery moved like she owned every hall she entered, not just as queen, but as if she'd been born beneath icy skies rather than golden ones. She listened more than she spoke, which made men talk too much. And when she did speak, it was always kind, always charming, and always just sharp enough to cut. Catelyn watched with a tightening in her chest. Robb's advisers, Lord Karstark, Great Jon Umber, even Rose Bolton, once unshakable pillars around her son, now sat stiffly during council. Not one of them trusted Margaery, but none dared oppose her publicly. They feared dividing the north further, or worse, losing Robb. She had become more than queen. She was Robb's anchor, his confidant, his distraction. And Margaery played the role beautifully. "I have no desire for war anymore," she told the lords, "only to rebuild, to plant things that last." Yet Catelyn noticed the reachmen arriving by the dozens, lesser lords, bannermen, merchants with ties to House Tyrell, all given homes in northern cities, all quietly taking positions of power. And gold flowed like never before. It was as if Margaery wasn't just queen, but founding a new reach in the bones of the north. Robb, ever noble, ever blinded by the ideal of peace, didn't see it, or worse, refused to. He kissed her hands at feasts. He defended her with sharp words when any lord questioned her growing influence. "She has brought peace," he'd say. "Respect her as you respect me." But peace came at the price of silence. It was Arya who first broke it, or rather Arya's voice. A ragged group of survivors from the Riverlands arrived at Winterfell. One of them, a boy who claimed he saw Arya alive near the Trident, hiding in plain sight, dressed as a boy, fierce as ever. Catelyn's hope flared like wildfire. She begged Robb to send men. He agreed and then hesitated. Margaery had entered the room, her eyes soft, her hands folded. "Should we not confirm it first, my love?" she said gently. "So many rumors swirl. To march for one whisper would weaken your hold on the south." Robb faltered. "We'll send scouts first," he said. Catelyn turned away before her tears fell. The war might have been won, but the battle for Robb's soul had just begun. And somewhere deep in King's Landing, Queen Cersei read a letter penned in Highgarden script. Her lips curled into a smirk. So the Tyrell girl had made her move, not with swords, but smiles. Not with armies, but with a bed. "Let her play Queen of the North," Cersei whispered. "The garden has grown over graves before." Back in Winterfell, a cold wind blew. Jon Snow, having left the wall for a diplomatic envoy under Robb's command, returned after months beyond the Neck. He noticed the change immediately. Northern soldiers wore reach armor. Southern accents echoed in the hallways. A feast was being prepared not in the old northern style, but with lemon cakes and golden wine. He found Catelyn first. Their conversation was tense but short. She simply said, "She has him." Jon saw Robb later that evening. His half-brother embraced him warmly, proud of his victories, glowing with life. But Jon saw what Catelyn meant. Robb no longer wore the weight of command alone. And that, Jon feared, was not a relief but a warning. And when Jon was introduced to Margaery, she smiled as if she'd known him forever. "You must be the famous bastard of Winterfell," she said sweetly, offering her hand like a queen. "I do hope you find peace here, Jon." And just like that, he knew. She already saw him as a threat. Jon Snow felt it in the stones beneath his boots, in the voices echoing down its halls. The cold was the same. The snow still fell like it always had, but warmth had drained from its spirit. It wasn't just the reach accents or the lemon cakes or the way Southern guards stood beside Stark banners like they belonged. It was the eyes. The northern folk watched their king with confusion now, some with resentment. They didn't understand how their young wolf, the boy who had risen against the throne and bled for vengeance, now sat beside a woman who spoke in honeyed tones and danced around truth with a southern lilt. But Jon understood. She had taken him, not with lies, not with seduction, but with patience and strategy. Margaery Tyrell had not married a man. She had married a kingdom. He stood with Robb in the training yard days after his return, wooden swords clashing beneath a grey sky. It felt almost like the old days, sweat, laughter, a break from politics. But even then, Robb paused when a servant whispered something from the shadows, a note from Margaery, a request, or perhaps a command. "She wants to discuss the grain storage for the upcoming winter," Robb said, wiping his brow. "Says the South can spare what the North cannot." Jon hesitated. "Does she sit in council now?" "She sits where I place her," Robb answered sharply. Then softer, "She's been helpful. The lords respect her." Jon didn't reply, because respect wasn't what he saw in their eyes. It was restraint. Like men watching a fire they weren't allowed to put out. That evening, Jon dined in the great hall, surrounded by faces half familiar. The older northern lords sat quieter now, eating slower, watching their queen too closely. Margaery floated among them, smiling, graceful, always touching an arm or laughing at the right moment. She made a performance of humility, but there was something almost cruel in how she observed the room, like a cat among tired mice. And then she addressed him directly, as if their last meeting hadn't bristled. "Jon," she said sweetly across the table, "you fought bravely in the north, they say. Across the table, you fought bravely in the north, they say. But the wall, surely you missed real food, real wine." Jon looked her in the eye. "I missed truth more." A few heads turned. The silence crackled. Margaery only smiled wider. "Ah, the north is famous for that. Truth, honor, stubbornness." Her voice never changed, but her eyes were hard as iron. After the feast, Jon sought out Catelyn. They met in her solar, surrounded by old Stark colors, and a map she kept meticulously updated with ink and pins. She didn't smile when he entered. "You see it too," she said without turning. "She's dividing them, slowly. She's making the North forget who they are." Jon nodded. "You should confront Robb." Catelyn looked at him, tired and lined with years that grief had carved. "I tried." He hears nothing now but her voice. She lies beside him at night, tells him the future, and he believes her. He thinks she's building peace. "She's building a kingdom," Jon replied, "but it won't belong to the Starks when she's done." Outside the solar, they heard the bells ring softly, a new arrival. By morning, word spread like fire. Sansa Stark was alive, escaped from King's Landing, freed from the Lannisters, escorted by a group of Tyrell riders loyal to Margaery's grandmother, Olenna Redwine. The news shook Winterfell like thunder. Sansa was returned, wrapped in a reach cloak, pale and quiet, but alive. Her presence should have brought joy, but for Catelyn and Jon, it brought suspicion, because Margaery had arranged it, and Sansa looked afraid. At the reunion, Robb wept. He embraced his sister fiercely, whispered apologies and promises. But Jon, standing to the side, saw Sansa's eyes dart to Margaery, not with gratitude but with terror. Later that night, Sansa spoke only one thing to Jon in passing. Her voice was faint. Her hand shook. "She said I'd be queen too one day," she whispered. Jon blinked. "Who?" Sansa didn't answer. She only walked away, eyes cast downward, her shadow long in the candlelight. Snow fell thick the next morning, blanketing the castle in silence. Winter had finally claimed the north in full. But inside Winterfell's stone walls, warmth didn't come from fire. It came from fear, from suspicion, from watching your words too closely. Even the youngest stable boys knew that some names weren't spoken aloud anymore, not without someone repeating them later in the wrong ear. Sansa Stark sat alone by the weirwood tree. She hadn't spoken much since her return. She smiled when expected, thanked Margaery in public, and kissed Robb's cheek in front of the court. But Jon knew that look. It was the same one Arya used to wear when lying to Septa Mordain, a quiet resistance behind soft eyes. He found her there, hands bare in the snow, her fingers red and raw. "You shouldn't be out here," he said gently. "I like the cold," she whispered. "It reminds me I'm not in King's Landing anymore." Jon stood beside her. "You are safe now." She gave a sad smile. "Am I?" There was a silence, broken only by the wind threading through the branches. Finally, Sansa looked up. "She's not what she seems, Jon. Margaery." "I know," he said. Sansa nodded slowly. "She saved me, but not for kindness. She needed me to look like a gift." Her prize returned to Robb, so no one would question her place here. Jon clenched his jaw. "What else has she said to you?" Sansa hesitated. She asked about Littlefinger. About alliances, about the veil, and she told me I should learn to smile without meaning it. Her voice cracked. "She said that's how real queens survive." Jon's blood ran colder than the snow. Sansa was a pawn. Worse, Margaery was preparing her for something bigger. Back in the castle, Catelyn watched the court change by the day. Southern customs were creeping in. Robb had begun inviting Reachmen into his inner circle. The Stark bannermen were restless. Lady Mormont had left without a word. The Umbers, still loyal, were drunk more often than not. Rose Bolton, that quiet, snake-eyed man, hadn't spoken against Margaery once. That worried her most. Meanwhile, Margaery played the perfect queen. She hosted daily readings for the ladies of court, organized prayers, and sent gifts to every northern house, even those that had turned cold. "We must forgive," she told Robb. "A kingdom divided cannot stand." But forgiveness in her voice always sounded like ownership. That night, during a private council meeting, Catelyn finally broke her silence. "We are losing the North." Robb looked stunned. "Mother!" "No," she interrupted. "You sit on a throne carved from snow and stone, but it's her roots that are wrapping around it. You speak her words. You see with her eyes, your bannermen feel it. Your people feel it." Margaery, seated beside him, did not blink. "Lady Stark," she said calmly, "if I've overstepped, you have invaded." The room fell silent. Robb stood, his voice rising with barely contained fury. "Enough, this ends now." But before anyone could speak again, a raven arrived. The blackbird screeched once, before the Maester took the scroll. He read it, eyes narrowing. "What is it?" Robb asked. The Maester hesitated, then handed him the parchment. "King Stannis has been declared dead, killed in a skirmish near Storm's End. The Baratheon line is broken." Margaery's eyes sparkled. "And there are no true kings left but you," she whispered. But Jon didn't miss it, the way she glanced toward the map of Westeros on the table. Not to the north, not even to the Westerlands. Her gaze rested on King's Landing, and in that moment he understood. Robb Stark had been fighting for the north, but Margaery Tyrell had always been fighting for the Iron Throne. The news of Stannis Baratheon's death spread through the north like wildfire wrapped in whispers. The south trembled with the weight of it. But in Winterfell, something more dangerous happened. Hope was reborn in the wrong hearts. Robb stood over the war table that night, staring down at the map of Westeros. Pins marked every territory under Tyrell influence now, not just the Reach. Quiet pacts, trade routes, and marriages had extended their reach far beyond Highgarden. And with Stannis dead, the Iron Throne sat even more vulnerable. "We could march south," Robb murmured. "With the Tyrells behind us, the Iron Throne might be within reach." Catelyn's voice came sharp, tired. The North did not rise for a chair in King's Landing. It rose for vengeance, for justice. But Margaery's hand slid into Robb's. "Your justice lives in peace," she said softly. "And peace comes when the realm is yours to keep safe. Who better than you, my love?" Robb didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. Catelyn watched the boy she'd raised. Now a king, yet still so young. The scars of war hadn't hardened him the way they should have. They'd only made him desperate to believe in something gentler. And Margaery offered exactly that. The illusion of peace dressed in silk and smiles. But Catelyn wasn't the only one who saw the trap forming. In the lower halls of Winterfell, Jon met Sansa again, this time away from Margaery's watchful shadows. They spoke quietly behind stone columns, where old gods still seemed to listen. "She wants me to marry a Tyrell cousin," Sansa said, her voice like cracked glass. "She says it will unite the North and South fully. That I'll be safer that way." "And do you believe her?" Jon asked. "I believe she knows how to use people," Sansa replied. "She used me to silence the North's doubts. She used Robb's love to claim power. She's using my name now, to finish what she started." Jon leaned against the cold wall. "We need proof. Something we can show Robb. He won't listen. Then we show someone who will." The plan began as a whisper. Find Margaery's letters. Track her messages to the south. If she was conspiring with the Tyrells beyond Robb's knowledge, it would be treason. And perhaps just enough to pull the wool from Robb's eyes, Arya would have stolen them in a heartbeat. But Arya wasn't here. So Jon went to the only man clever and reckless enough to help. Tyrion Lannister. He had arrived only days ago under safe passage, granted by an uneasy truce between Robb and the remnants of House Lannister. He brought no army, only riddles and diplomacy, and Jon suspected his own reasons for wanting Margaery's power checked. "You're not wrong to worry," Tyrion said, sipping wine and watching Jon across the table. "I've met many queens, Snow. Most try to hold the throne. Margaery, she builds them. Can you get into her chambers? Jon asked. Tyrion raised a brow. You do realize you're asking me to spy on the most powerful woman in Westeros, in the heart of a castle filled with her loyal guards? Jon didn't blink. Yes. Tyrion smirked. Then I must be drunk enough to agree. Meanwhile, Margaery was already preparing the next step. She summoned Sansa to her solar, alone. The fire crackled behind her, casting long shadows on the tapestries. Southern roses, twisting around northern wolves. I have a vision, Sansa, Margaery said, offering her a cup of warm wine. A united realm. You and I are two queens. No one needs to die anymore. Sansa didn't drink. You speak of unity, but you divide us. Margaery's smile didn't falter. You're still thinking like a Stark. So much honor. So much fear. You need to let it go, Sansa. The North won't survive another war. Let them follow peace. And if they don't? Sansa asked. Margaery looked at her, voice soft as silk. Then they'll follow silence. Then they'll follow silence. And in that moment, Sansa realized something more terrifying than all the wars that came before. Margaery wasn't just planning to rule. She was planning to erase everything that wasn't hers. Tyrion came to Jon after midnight, his cloak dusted with snow, breath sharp in the icy air. No guards followed him. He'd paid them off or slipped past with the cunning he'd once used in the Red Keep. In his gloved hand, he carried a scroll, bound in Tyrell green and sealed in wax bearing the sigil of House Hightower. You'll want to sit for this, Tyrion said. But we both know you won't. Jon didn't. He took the scroll, cracked the seal, and read. It wasn't just words. It was a map, one written in ink and implication. Margaery had been in contact with the Hightowers, the Red Wines, and even certain bannermen of the Vale. The letters mentioned the future Queen's southern restoration and preparations to secure Winterfell's transition after the King's campaign toward King's Landing. She's planning for after Robb, Jon said, voice low, cold. Tyrion nodded grimly. In the south we call that what it is, treason. But not by sword, Jon murmured. She's not going to kill him. She's going to replace him. Peacefully, of course, Tyrion added. The best coups always are. Jon felt the weight of it in his chest. This wasn't just about the throne. This wasn't about love or even ambition. This was colonization, done with charm, not conquest. She'll name a son after a Stark, Tyrion said quietly, but she'll raise him a Tyrell. Jon's hand closed around the scroll. She has to be stopped. Tyrion gave a dry laugh. If you do it wrong, you'll look like the traitor. Robb will defend her, and the North will split in two. She'll have what she wants anyway. So Jon did something he hated. He went to Roose Bolton. The man had always been unreadable, cold, silent, eyes like glass. Jon didn't trust him, but he didn't need trust. He needed leverage. They met under cover of darkness, near the crypts. Margaery is not your queen, Jon said without pretense. She is replacing the North, one family at a time. You see it. I know you do. Rose didn't blink. And what would you have me do, Snow? Stand with me when the time comes. Don't kneel to her. Don't let the North die with Robb's mistake. Roose's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. It may be dying already. Upstairs, in the Queen's chambers, Margaery stood before a mirror brushing her hair. Behind her, Sansa stood quietly, watching, waiting. You've grown strong, Margaery said. I learned from Cersei, Sansa replied, and now from you. Margaery turned, amused. Are you comparing me to that woman? You're worse, Sansa whispered, because she never pretended to be kind. Margaery laughed. You'll thank me one day. But Sansa said nothing. She'd already written a letter to Peter Baelish in the Vale, a warning, a call, and a trap if need be. Because if Margaery was planning for after Robb, Sansa would be ready before her. The next morning, Jon confronted Robb. It wasn't a council. No lords, no guards. Just two brothers beneath the snow-heavy sky. Jon showed him the scroll. Let him read every line. Let him see the truth unfiltered. Robb's face didn't change, not immediately. He read slowly, carefully. But when his eyes reached the end, Jon saw the flicker, that flash of hurt. No seal from her. No handwriting I recognize, Robb said at last. She's too clever for that, Jon replied. But the names are real. The plans are in motion. She's my wife. She's replacing you. Silence. Then Robb turned away, looking out over the ramparts. I bled for the North. I've watched brothers die. I did what I had to do to win peace. Jon stepped forward. And now you're losing the North to someone who never fought for it, who never understood it. She doesn't love you, Robb. She owns you. Robb's jaw clenched. You don't know that. Jon's voice dropped to a whisper. Yes, I do. Because I saw it in Sansa's eyes. She's terrified, and if you don't stop this now, she'll be the next piece Margaery moves. For a long time, Robb said nothing. Then quietly, I need time. Jon knew what that meant. Time to not believe. Time to look away. But Winterfell had run out of time, because that very night another raven flew. This one bore the royal seal of King's Landing, and inside, written in the unmistakable hand of Cersei Lannister, to the Queen of the North, may you rule wisely in your husband's shadow. But should that shadow fall, the Iron Throne remains open to those who know how to claim it. Robb sat in his chambers long after the fire had gone out. The scroll from King's Landing lay open on the table beside him, its words carved into his brain like a curse. The Iron Throne remains open. And though he didn't want to admit it, he could hear Cersei's laughter behind those words, not because she had won, but because she knew someone else would do her work for her. Margaery had not yet mentioned the letter. Either she hadn't seen it, or she didn't need to. Jon waited outside the door. He didn't push. He had done enough. The truth had been placed before the king, and now only Robb could decide what to do with it. But down in the crypts, Sansa had already made her choice. She stood alone before the statue of Ned Stark, the cold stone face of the man who once ruled the North in silence, with honor and restraint. She touched the carving gently. I've played the good daughter, she whispered. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I obeyed when I should have run, but not anymore. From her sleeve she pulled a folded parchment, another letter. Not to Baelish this time, but to House Mormont, to the Glovers, to every northern house that still remembered what it meant to kneel to no one. In it she told the truth plainly. Robb is king in name, but it is the queen who rules Winterfell now. If the North is to remain the North, we must act before we are all wearing Reach colours and calling it tradition. She signed it not as a princess, but as Sansa Stark of Winterfell. Later that day, Margaery summoned Robb to the solar. The fireplace was roaring. The room smelled of honey and dried flowers. She poured him wine herself, the sweetest from the arbour. She was dressed in northern grey, but the rose pin still glimmered on her chest. There's unrest, she said, without pretense. Your sister writes letters. Jon meets with Rose. Even Tyrion Lannister slinks through the shadows. Robb said nothing. Margaery set the goblet before him and sat on the edge of the long oak table. I have given you peace, she said. Stability. The people love me. They fear you, he replied. Her smile didn't fade. Only those who should. He looked at her fully for the first time, not as a man looking at his wife, but as a king looking at a rival. You married me to take the North, and now you want more. I want what I've earned, Margaery said smoothly. A new realm, one that doesn't starve itself on ancient grudges and broken honor. A realm that grows. With me, with us. There is no us, Robb said, standing slowly. Not anymore. The words hung in the air like frost. For the first time, Margaery's expression cracked. Not much, just a flicker of something beneath the surface. You can't afford to lose me, she said. You think the northern houses will follow you into another war? Against the Reach, against your own queen. I hold half your realm in my hand. Robb's jaw clenched. Then I'll cut off the hand. He turned and left her there. But as the door shut, Margaery didn't weep, didn't rage. She walked to the hearth, threw in a small scroll, burned it to ash, then turned to her maid and whispered, Send for Sir Vortem. Tell him the seeds are ready. We cannot afford to wait for harvest. That night, poison was slipped into the stew meant for Jon Snow. Only by chance, a servant switching bowls, was it discovered. The man who took Jon's portion died within the hour, vomiting black blood. The North erupted in quiet fury. Jon survived, but the message was clear. Margaery wasn't playing anymore. Back in her chambers, she wrote one last letter. This one to Old Town, to her family, to the Tyrell Council behind the curtain. The North is unraveling. Robb will not yield. If the wolf won't wear a collar, we may have no choice but to skin it. Morning broke over Winterfell like a slow bleed. A grey sky, silent snow, and no songs in the halls. The whispers had grown into something sharper. The attempted poisoning of Jon Snow had not stayed hidden. Word spread through the castle with the quiet rage only Northerners knew how to wield. No one said Margaery's name out loud, but every glance toward her doors was heavy with what went unspoken. The stew boy who died in Jon's place had no family name, no title. He was just a boy from Deepwood Motte, but by midday his death had become a symbol. A southern queen had tried to silence a Stark and failed. Jon stood before Robb that morning, pale but alive. The poison had touched his lips, but not enough to claim him. His eyes burned, not with anger, but clarity. "You cannot protect her anymore," he said. "She tried to kill me." Robb didn't argue. He only whispered, "I know." Behind them, Catelyn entered with Sansa, both dressed in mourning black. Behind them, Catelyn entered with Sansa, both dressed in mourning black. Not for the stew boy, for what was coming. By dusk, the courtyard filled. Every northern house still loyal to Winterfell stood present: Mormont, Glover, Reed, Serwyn. Even men who had once wavered returned at the call. They were not summoned by Robb. They had answered Sansa's raven. She stood at the head of the stairs, beside Jon, beside her mother. Not behind the king, but beside the true North. Robb emerged last, his crown on, his face unreadable. Margaery did not appear. He spoke without flourish. "My queen has violated our peace. She has spilled blood within these walls. And though I once loved her and believed in her light, I now see the garden she grew was meant to bury us." The crowd did not cheer. They did not roar, they simply nodded. Because justice in the North was not a performance. It was duty. The queen was to be confined. She would stand before the houses in a trial by council, not execution. Robb had insisted. Let justice be done right, not fast. But Margaery Tyrell had other plans. By the time they reached her chambers, she was already gone. 2 guards lay dead, her handmaid strangled with her own hair ribbon. The window shattered. Below, a horse stolen. Her scent still clung to the winter wind. "She's fleeing," Jon growled. "Let me ride." "No," Robb said. "Let her run." But Rose Bolton stepped forward, calm as ever. "Run south and she'll return with 1,000 swords." "No, this ends now." He gave the signal. From the shadows, his bastard son, Ramsay, emerged, blood already splattered across his gloves. The riders waiting at the gates weren't Robb's. They were Bolton men. Catelyn stepped back in horror. "What have you done?" "I've secured our future," Rose said. That night, news reached Winterfell like thunder under the snow. Margaery Tyrell's body had been found, strangled and broken beside the King's Road, her horse missing, her satchel ripped open. No trial, no queen, just a dead girl from the south. Robb stood in the Godswood for hours, staring at the weirwood tree, his crown resting at its roots. "She was clever," he whispered to Jon. "Too clever." "You wanted peace," Jon said. "She wanted power. And now we've lost both." Sansa joined them, the wind lifting her auburn hair. "It's not over," she said softly. "The Tyrells will come. And others. They'll call it murder, treason. They'll want blood." Robb turned to her. "Then we give them Winterfell," he said. "Not in flames, not in fear, but in strength." He looked at Jon. "You lead the defense." He looked at Sansa. "You speak for the North." And then he looked at the old gods, the ones who had watched over Stark blood for generations, and whispered, "I will not die in someone else's story." The next morning, Robb stripped the Reach colours from the halls. The roses were burned, the tapestries torn down. Only the direwolf flew again. Winter had come, but this time the North was ready, and the wolf no longer slept. It bared its teeth. It bared its teeth.